وإن شاء الله تكونوا you had a great weekend. Sorry أنا معكم اليوم from my mobile phone for personal reasons. Hope you're enjoying هالweather. It's sunny بس كمان windy at the same time. بداية بس بدي نبهكم مش أذكركم إنه tomorrow for certain reasons كمان we're not going to be having a session. And on Wednesday, our session على الساعة 4 as well as regular. على الخميس, we have another session as well at 4 o'clock. And we have a second session كمان استثنائيا الخميس على الساعة 5:30 وبيرجع الجمعة as well. Our last session for this webinar series على الساعة 4. Today, guys, our speaker is Dr. Khalil Diab, who is an associate professor at LU and also at Indiana University. He's going to be delivering a talk about electronic cigarettes and their, well, ما بدي أقول their importance, but, well, I guess the lack of importance in certain aspects. We're going to be talking about the different components that are present in the electronic cigarette. At the same time, what are the side effects of the electronic cigarette? And we're going to be comparing electronic cigarettes as well للسيجارة العادية. بدنا نشوف هل electronic cigarette is it better, is it not؟ لأنه كلنا بنسمع هالأيام إنه electronic cigarette is healthier. هلا بالنهاية يمكن ما في any type of smoke of دخان that is actually considered to be healthy enough. But I think Dr. Khalil Diab will be able to deliver key points on this particular aspect and hopefully settle it for us once and for all. So, Khalil, would you like to take over from here?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. For sure, yes, I'm going to be talking about electronic cigarettes, and I'm going to be separating the myth from the facts and talking about whether they are, we'll know in a bit whether they're good or bad or somewhere in between, I guess. And so, see here. Sorry. Objectives of my presentation: discuss electronic cigarettes and their components, discuss the difference between electronic cigarettes and traditional cigarettes or conventional cigarettes. We're going to be talking also about the role of electronic cigarettes in tobacco cessation, and discuss the side effects of electronic cigarettes. You can see that we have many different types. It's not like there's only one electronic cigarette that we have to deal with. There's multiple different types of cigarettes that we have to deal with. We'll go through the different types over here. And as you can see, they come in many different sizes and shapes. We've got the tanks and mods, and these are basically what you do is you buy a tank and then you start buying different mods for it that contain different flavors or different things that help the person smoke the cigarette, basically. There's a rechargeable electronic cigarette where the battery inside the cigarette could be like a USB-like battery to make it easy to recharge. So you use it, it lasts for a while, then you recharge it. That way you don't have to buy a new battery. And then there's also the newest ones are the disposable electronic cigarettes, which actually each one of them has its own small battery. You use it, you smoke it, and then you end up disposing of it afterwards. E-cigarettes, there's just show you the different parts of an electronic cigarette here. We've got there's a mouthpiece, that's where you smoke the cigarette. Then you've got the cartridge tank that holds the liquid juice inside. Then you've got the heating element or atomizer, which heats the juice to make the vapor. And there's like a switch to activate the heating element over here. So basically, just to summarize, and then a battery at the end, and a LED, sometimes diode, that lights the cigarette to make it look like it's a regular cigarette, a LED indicator inside it. And these are two types here of electronic cigarettes. This is the disposable one, and this is one of the ones that has a battery inside it that could be rechargeable in this case. What we can see here, basically what you have is the liquid juice that is activated by the person sucking on the cigarette, trying to inhale, and this produces the vapor that we see and basically produces the smoke that you see in the electronic cigarette. So just to say that the smoke in the electronic cigarette is different than the smoke in a conventional cigarette, which I'll talk about in a bit. But the contents of electronic cigarette could be multiple. I mean, some of them could have nicotine. Most of them do actually. But some actually could be nicotine-free electronic cigarettes. You can have volatile organic compounds. You can have ultrafine particles. Some of them have heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead. Some of them have flavoring such as diacetyl, a chemical linked to serious lung disease. Basically, it's the one that's used for flavoring of popcorn, and we've seen in different chemical factories that this is something that could potentially happen. Just to show you the different ingredients, I mean, there's not one ingredient in the electronic cigarettes. There's multiple different ingredients in multiple different cigarettes produced by multiple companies. So they're not very well regulated yet, and therefore each company places their own ingredients in it, and it's important for the person who's going to smoke it to look at what ingredients there are in the cigarette. For example, some of them have glycerol, propylene glycol, and nicotine. These are basically the ones, for the most part, are present in all of them. But then you can have other compounds such as ethylene glycol, formaldehyde, tobacco alkaloids. You can have, but like we said, formaldehyde could be a cancer-causing agent, basically. They can have metals such as cadmium, lead, nickel, tin, and copper. Toluene, which is some of the components of benzene, so ethanol. I mean, a lot of components inside them, and therefore it's important to view what's inside the electronic cigarette, basically. Just to show you a regular cigarette, the difference, basically, a regular cigarette has a filter, which we always hear about, and this actually is designed to trap smoke, but basically only stops a small portion of the smoke from getting inhaled. Then you've got some ventilation holes on the filter, and these are actually designed to let air come in with the smoke so you can dilute the smoke and the person does not inhale as much smoke. The problem with the ventilation holes, they're in the same area where a person can put their fingers over the holes and close them down. So basically, they don't work as well as we think they should work. There's, of course, the paper around it. Then you've got the cigarette paper. And the important thing about it is I mean, if you have a paper, it should burn very quickly. It doesn't burn very quickly because the companies have chemicals inside it that prevent it from burning very quickly. And these chemicals could be cancer-causing or harmful to the individual. Also, they add a lot of additives to the cigarettes, such as sugar and flavor to make it more addictive. They add ammonia and other chemicals, and that can increase the absorption of nicotine, and nicotine can make it more addictive to people. Also, some of them have bronchodilators inside them, or substances that increase the diameter of the airways, so you can absorb more smoke into your lower airways and get more absorption of nicotine that way. And of course, inside you've got the tobacco and all the impurities that are associated with it, and that could be cancer-causing too. So that's the difference between an electronic cigarette is a battery-powered cigarette that burns substances, basically, or vaporizes substances that give you smoke, as opposed to a regular cigarette in which we have substances that you smoke actually tobacco inside of which produces the nicotine. In electronic cigarette, you have the nicotine inside the filler, basically. Just to show you the patterns of cigarette use, in 2018, 3.05 million American high school students used electronic cigarettes, and that was defined as using it once in the past 30 days. So that's a big number of high school students. And there's been a surge. If you look at 2017 versus 2018, there has been a 78% increase among high school students in smoking electronic cigarettes, basically. Among high school current e-cigarette users, there's been a rise in the use of flavors, basically. So they use more used flavored e-cigarettes. Actually, it's 68% in 2018 versus 61% in 2017. But then one thing that's very interesting is that not only high school students are using e-cigarettes more frequently, also there's a surge in middle school students and youth using electronic cigarettes. Basically, there has been a 48% increase among middle school students between 2017 and 2018. So it is a large number of people who are using electronic cigarettes, and it's increasing among the youth, which is a bit concerning, which I'll discuss in a bit, given the fact that we don't have a lot of data yet about the safety potentially and of electronic cigarettes. This is just here the discussion of now we talked about youth using electronic cigarettes, but the other question that arises is can electronic cigarettes be used for smoking cessation, or for people who already smoke or older adults, should they be used for smoking cessation? And this is here in an article showing a nicotine electronic cigarette versus a placebo electronic cigarette, and we see that there is actually a trend towards, in both randomized controlled trials, and there's not a lot of trials actually, but these are the two trials. There is a trend towards more quitting in the people who smoke electronic cigarettes. However, what we call here is we have a very wide confidence interval, and so the results are not as statistically significant or as significant as we think. So we don't know with 100% certainty, but it seems maybe it helps people quit. But what's been seen in a lot of these studies is that people tend to decrease the number of cigarettes that they're smoking, but they still smoke both the electronic cigarette and the regular cigarette at the same time. So that's something important to note. This is here a comparison of the nicotine electronic cigarette versus nicotine replacement therapy. Where what we mean by nicotine replacement therapy is potentially nicotine patches, nicotine gum, all the stuff, and we see here that it may also be more beneficial to quit using electronic cigarette. However, again, we are talking about the side effects of the electronic cigarette itself, and whether the people are still smoking on it or not, basically. E-cigarettes for smoking cessation, a limited number of randomized trials have actually been reported. So certainty about effects is low. That's important to note. More data is needed to strengthen confidence in the estimates. There is evidence from pooled results of two trials that electronic cigarettes with nicotine compared with placebo electronic cigarettes help smokers to stop smoking long-term. This corresponds to findings from placebo-controlled trials of nicotine replacement therapy. Placebo means that you think you're smoking when you're not smoking. You're smoking something that looks like an electronic cigarette or a cigarette, but it's not producing any nicotine or anything like that. And this is, granted, this is a Cochrane database review. So basically what they do in the Cochrane database is they review multiple trials, some of them good quality, some of them bad quality, and they give us the conclusions from these trials. So basically in this Cochrane database review, it seems that maybe they're effective in helping quitting smoking, but still more data is needed on that. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, or the U.S. PSTF, unequivocally states that the current evidence is insufficient to recommend electronic nicotine delivery systems for tobacco cessation in adults, including pregnant women. The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommends that clinicians direct patients who smoke tobacco to other cessation interventions with established effectiveness and safety. So basically, they're saying that at this point, there's not enough data to say that electronic cigarettes should be used there's nicotine has a lot of side effects. Basically, it's addictive. It can be toxic to developing fetuses. It can affect adolescent and young adult brain development. It's a health danger to pregnant women. It can cause increased risk of heart disease. It can cause erectile dysfunction, anovulation, increased cancer risk, and so a lot of side effects from nicotine itself are present at this point in time. Other health effects of other components of e-cigarettes too, because nicotine is not the only component as we discussed. You've got formaldehyde and acetaldehyde in some of the cigarettes, which can cause increased risk of cancer. We've got e-cigarette aerosol, depending on the component, can cause acute lung inflammation. And we'll talk about it in a bit. It can cause decreased ability to fight infection because of inflammation. And actually, there's been reports of worse influenza cases with electronic cigarettes. It can cause worsening asthma symptoms, especially in those patients who do have asthma. There's a possible link to the development of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or emphysema, which is lung disease, from smoking. But the reason we don't know as much yet about that is because COPD takes about 20 to 30 years after smoking to develop, and we don't have data 20 years out from electronic cigarettes to say whether or not that is the case. It can cause what we call bronchiolitis obliterans. If you remember the diacetyl flavoring component that we discussed earlier that is used with popcorn as a flavoring, this can cause what we call popcorn lung, or a significant lung inflammation, preventing the air from leaving the lung. And here I can show you some cases of bronchiolitis obliterans on these scans or CTs of the chest of patients who had it. We can see here, this is a normal scan of the chest showing the air in black and the vessels in white. But here we see more whiteness inside. So the patient breathes out, or during expiration, you see that the air gets trapped inside. And these are all three cases of what we call bronchiolitis obliterans secondary to diacetyl. So another question that's arisen, I think, recently, and I wanted to bring it to attention, especially these days, is smoking and COVID-19, because there's been a lot of data recently that smoking may be beneficial or protective against a severe COVID-19 infection. So just to review the data, the first data that was reported was actually from the Chinese Medical Journal, based on data from China in December and November. And what they saw was that a significantly higher number of patients with a history of smoking actually progressed or got worse disease than the patients who were not smokers. Okay, this is from China. So 27.3% of smokers actually got worse disease versus only 3% of non-smokers who got worse disease in one of the hospitals in China. So the second one here, which we'll discuss, is the one that came out of France recently, and that is a major study where they wanted to evaluate the correlation of daily smoking with the susceptibility to develop SARS-CoV-2 infection or COVID-19 infection. It was mostly patients, inpatients or patients inside the hospital in France, 343 patients. And they found that only of all the 343 patients admitted to the hospital in France, what they found was that only 4.4% of those were smokers. When you look at the number of smokers in France, it is a much higher number of smokers in France, which was 25.4%. And similar to, they also studied the outpatients with COVID-19, they found the same thing. So the question the French are asking now are why is the percentage of smokers who are sick with COVID-19 less than the percentage of smokers in France? But one thing to note is that when you this was based on asking patients who were admitted whether they smoke or not, and a lot of people, when they go into the hospital, if they quit like several months ago, they would say, "Oh, we don't smoke," or they could have quit a couple of weeks prior because of COVID-19, because of what they heard from WHO, and then they say we don't smoke. So I think it's underreported. Possibly the number of smokers in this study was underreported because people did not mention that either they quit because they were scared of COVID-19, or they did not mention that they smoke. But the conclusions from this study for them was that in both COVID-19 out and in patients, the data strongly suggests that daily smokers have a very much lower probability of developing symptomatic or severe infection as compared to the general population. Again, the WHO says it's worth noting that this data is not a randomized trial. It's just an observational data. And again, we talked about the problems with this data, and therefore I would not conclude from this study that smoking is beneficial or preventative of COVID-19 infection. So a review of the studies by public health experts convened by WHO on 29 April 2020 found that smokers are more likely to develop severe disease with COVID-19 compared to non-smokers from the Chinese Medical Journal study. The WHO is constantly evaluating new research, including research that examines the link between tobacco use, nicotine use, and COVID-19. WHO urges researchers, scientists, and the media to be cautious about amplifying unproven claims that tobacco or nicotine could reduce the risk of COVID-19. There is currently insufficient information to confirm any link between tobacco or nicotine in the prevention or treatment of COVID-19 infections. So that's what the WHO is still saying at this point. So I would not, by any stretch of the imagination, I would not recommend people to smoke or you can use nicotine patches at this point to prevent COVID-19 infection. One of the things with e-cigarettes, I don't know if you've heard about it, but came out significantly in February and January of 2020, and that was before we got into the COVID-19 issue. There was a bunch of cases in the US of people, i.e. as of February 18, 2020, there was a total of 2,807 hospitalized patients with inflammation in their lungs, or what we call e-cigarette or vaping induced acute lung injury that were reported from all 50 states and District of Columbia. There were 68 deaths confirmed in 29 states and DC. And what the CDC did at the time was they started collecting samples from these people, including lavage samples or washings from their lungs, and they looked at the types of electronic cigarettes these people were smoking. And what they found eventually was that there was a substance called vitamin E, which is used with marijuana and cannabinoids in electronic cigarettes, and 83% of the patients who developed the e-cigarette or vaping-induced acute lung injury actually had added marijuana to their electronic cigarettes, while only 17% were using nicotine products. But the common substance that was found was vitamin E acetate, because it was found in all these electronic cigarettes, but also it was found in the washings of the lungs of these people, and therefore companies were asked to remove this substance from them, and people are being asked at this point not to add their own cartridges containing marijuana and stuff to the cigarettes, because that can cause this vaping-induced lung injury, which may lead to even death, as we saw 68 out of 2,807 people died due to electronic cigarettes. Just to show you some x-rays, this is a normal chest x-ray. You can see the heart in the middle, you can see the right lung, you can see the left lung, and these are patients, all this whiteness for these patients. So that was not a good thing that developed in these patients. So legislation that is important that has come out is that the FDA has issued legislation in January 2020 to control the use of e-cigarettes in youth, banning the use of fruit and menthol. And the reason they banned the use of fruit and menthol and electronic cigarettes is because people or youth are smoking more electronic cigarettes with flavoring in them. There are laws in Lebanon regulating the imports and sales of electronic cigarettes, and in fact, until February of this year, electronic cigarettes were only sold on the black market, and they could not be sold legally since February of 2020. Prior to that, they were sold on the black market. Prior to that, one thing I'm just going to go through a Lebanese study that was done in Lebanon here, and it looked at the frequency distribution of electronic cigarette smoking habits among study participants in Beirut, Lebanon. And what they looked at is what prompted people to smoke electronic cigarettes the most, and they looked at the flavoring. And actually, when they had the fruit flavor, people actually smoke them more often, 45.8%. So flavoring does stimulate people to smoke electronic cigarettes. What made you start smoking is e-cigarettes, mostly taste, so flavoring, again. We get to that too. And compared to regular cigarettes, how much satisfaction do you get? What's good is that most of the people said actually less. They got less satisfaction for electronic cigarettes compared to regular cigarettes. This is here another one looking at the knowledge of participants of electronic cigarettes, and I'll show it in a bit. And I'll show you a curve in a bit of this, but to summarize, most people had wrong answers when asked about questions related to electronic cigarettes, and I'll show you a curve related to this in just a bit. But what we look at here is negative attitudes, and here no is a negative attitude. Multiple questions that I'll show you in a bit. But most people in Lebanon have actually negative attitudes against electronic cigarettes. And one of the theories behind that is that because the Ministry of Health did not or banned them for a very long time because they wanted to regulate them, and therefore there was a lot of negative conceptions about electronic cigarettes related to that. Just to show you here, this is how people smoke in Lebanon. Basically, most people smoke cigarettes, and that's 53%. 5% smoke cigars, although we see some of these people in restaurants and stuff like that at this point. Some people smoke hookahs. 26% actually smoke hookahs, and the minorities smoke like pipe and other things that are smoked. The smoking cessation methods, I think, from what we see here is the most people, what they do in Lebanon, they just reduce the number of cigarettes per day. And I've asked multiple people in clinic about that, and they that's a major thing that they do, is reduce the number of cigarettes per day that they smoke. E-cigarettes actually are used only in 13% of the cases of smoke cessation method. And then, of course, minority, which should be more actually, is behavioral therapy, nicotine patch, medications. The flavors of e-cigarettes used, fruit was the most common flavor of electronic cigarettes that was used, that we discussed earlier, followed by tobacco flavor next, what came in line here. Important questions to be asked here is the e-cigarette knowledge among the participants. When asked whether e-cigarettes are associated with bladder cancer, 75% answered that incorrectly, saying they are not, when they probably are, because they have the cancer-inducing substances that potentially smoking has. I think was some e-liquid flavors are more harmful than others. 70.1% answered that incorrectly. There is some that are more harmful, such as when we add diacetyl, which is the popcorn flavor, it is more harmful. There was another one, e-cigarettes are not associated with lung cancer. 54.4% thought they were not, but they are. So they're being viewed actually as safer than they are. E-cigarettes can impair lung and heart function. They can do the same thing as smoking and impair lung and heart function. 50.9% answered that wrong. E-cigarettes do not contribute to secondhand smoke. They actually do, and therefore 46.2% answered that wrong. E-cigarettes can have an effect on fetal development. Yes, they can, because of nicotine component, especially in them, and therefore 39% answered that wrong. Harmful flavors and toxins are found in the e-cigarette aerosol. 38% answered that wrong. Now, towards when we discuss the attitudes of participants towards electronic cigarettes, it is more socially acceptable to smoke e-cigarettes compared to regular cigarettes. Actually, most people said no. 56.7% said no, and that is negative attitude. E-cigarettes should replace regular cigarettes. 55.7% said no. It is acceptable to experiment with e-cigarettes for pleasure. 55.7% said no. E-cigarettes are an effective way to help in smoking cessation. 51.4% said no. And e-cigarettes can help people cut down on cigarettes or quit smoking, and 46.1% said no. So basically, there's a huge, about 50% negative view of e-cigarettes in Lebanon. But people also, as we saw up there, people do not know enough about their side effects as of yet, basically. Just to conclude, and then I'll go back a bit to discussing some of the components of electronic cigarettes. Again, electronic cigarettes, they encompass a wide variety of products, basically. It's not only one product, as we discussed. There is the tanks and mods, and if you go online and look for it, you'll find multiple different flavorings and multiple different mods online. It's as if you're shopping for clothes or for other things. There's the rechargeable e-cigarettes with even USB rechargeable batteries to make it very easy to recharge these batteries. And finally, what's coming out is and people use them in Lebanon. People are using those more. I think from my patients is people using the disposable electronic cigarettes that look like regular cigarettes, and these are getting to be more common too. The contents of e-cigarettes are not the same, and therefore their side effects could be variable. As we discussed earlier, some electronic cigarettes could have formaldehyde in them. Some of them could have other substances such as toluene or diacetyl for flavoring, and therefore the side effects of these e-cigarettes could be different. As we discussed, some of them can have vitamin E acetate in them, which is now being removed, but that could cause severe acute lung injury and even death due to that. Are they good for tobacco cessation? It's still unknown, I think, and based on the studies that I showed you, it's unknown whether they are good tobacco cessation products to use or not. At this point, I think if somebody asks me, a patient asks me, should I use them for tobacco cessation, I would say probably not. If you can quit smoking using other methods such as nicotine patches or gum, or using medications or behavioral therapy, that could be a much safer alternative than electronic cigarettes. However, if somebody would not quit, except that they use e-cigarettes, sometimes they tell them, you know what, maybe it's better than smoking in terms of cancer risk over the long term. If you do not smoke, it's recommended that you do not start smoking these products. And this is what's scary, is a lot of the companies such as Philip Morris and others, tobacco companies, are starting to buy these electronic cigarettes and develop them themselves. And as we can see, the youth rate of smoking e-cigarettes is increasing, which would get these people addicted on nicotine, and would this potentially increase the risk even of smoking regular cigarettes or conventional cigarettes, that we do not know. I think this concludes my talk here. I can go back to some of the slides if needed, and I just wanted to check if there's any questions at this time. Any questions? Better stick with cigar. No, I wouldn't. I saw this question. I mean, I would not stick with cigar. That was a funny question. There was a question about whether we should stick with cigar or not, and I would say, of course not, because cigars actually are multiple cigarettes at the same time. But and one thing to even think about, I did not mention it in my presentation, is that a lot of these electronic cigarettes, the cartridges that you put in them, if you smoke the whole cartridge, that's equivalent to 20 cigarettes, actually. 20 cigarettes. So it is a lot. It is a lot of cigarettes, basically, in one e-cigarette potentially. Any other questions? I don't know if there's people. Anybody hearing me here? Okay, good. Okay, if there's no other questions, I think I'm going to stop the screen share. Yes, we have a few minutes. So the pipe, you mean the pipe, the tobacco pipe is similar, I guess, to a cigarette. The tobacco pipe is similar to a cigarette itself, basically. So basically, there are actually e-cigarette pipes, funnily enough, but the tobacco pipe is similar. I mean, you're still smoking tobacco, and that's not necessarily a good thing. And then there's a question that just came out saying that, can you mention the effects on the heart, please? So it's similar to smoking, I think. Nicotine itself can lead to what we call constriction, or the vessels that supply the heart become much smaller, and therefore the blood supply to various portions of the heart can lead to heart attacks and high blood pressure, similar to regular cigarettes. So potentially the effects on the heart are not as good as we think. So I would say they're not good for the heart, similar to cigarettes potentially, because we know that their acute effects on the heart are similar to smoking. They decrease the blood supply to the heart. Now, another question that came out is, why are they marketed and available so much if they're that bad? So it's unknown. Again, the view right now is, remember when people started smoking cigarettes many years ago, it was actually a trendy thing. So people were smoking. There were ads everywhere, and people did not know how bad these cigarettes are. However, for e-cigarettes, it's the same now. We're getting more and more data as we go, but the initial data there was not present, and therefore the companies found it a way to market these cigarettes. To market these e-cigarettes, because they cannot market, right? They cannot market regular cigarettes. So they're like, okay, now we can market e-cigarettes, and that's why a lot of the companies bought them and started marketing them strongly. I mean, there's a lot of countries now that are coming up with laws trying to at least ban marketing of these cigarettes, or ban their use. Like we said, the FDA now is trying to ban flavored e-cigarettes to decrease the risk of smoking e-cigarettes in the US. The Lebanese government did not accept to get them through into the market. They were for a long time on a black market until it made sure what the contents of these cigarettes are. So there is more regulations coming in, and I think with time we're going to see their side effects, and I think they will have significant side effects as we go. Now the other question is, do e-cigarettes have an effect on appetite? Yes, if they're nicotine containing, because nicotine itself does suppress appetite, and a lot of people who stop smoking tell you that their appetite goes up and they start eating more. So I think if they're nicotine containing e-cigarettes, yes, they can have an effect on appetite. Yes. I think that's the last question that I got. I don't know if there's any more questions. Let's see here. I'm trying to check here what marketing is. Where are they marked? Yes, we can hear you. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for the. Thank you. Okay. Bye.